Well, good day, and thank you very much for being with us on this webinar, Providing Environmental Security Through the I-94 Corridor. My name is Carl Lisek, and we have a great cast of speakers who will be providing you with an update on this project, as well as some of our upcoming future plans. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on all of our websites and Clean Cities partner websites. I think the one clear message that you will hear today throughout the webinar is about clearly working together and sharing of information. We were going to have Mr. Ted Barnes from Gas Technology Institute, Mr. Jeremy Orr from the Greater Lansing Area Clean Cities, Mr. Mark Rowe of Trillium CNG, and Mr. Matthew Blacker of Zev Energy will be giving you an update on the project. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ted Barnes of Gas Technology Institute. Ted, take it away.
Thank you very much, Carl. Hello, everyone. My name is Ted Barnes, and I'm the project lead on this project. The title is U.S. Fuels Across America's Highways, Michigan to Montana. We affectionately refer to it as the M2M project. And I must say, this really is one of the most exciting projects I've ever worked on throughout my career. And to all of you non-engineers and scientists out there, I'm sure that's probably not that impressive of a statement, just because mechanical engineering projects really aren't typically that exciting. But this year, you know, compared to some of the things I've been able to do for the DOE, which, you know, have ranged very widely from other deployment projects, just kind of the overall breadth and just the aggressive nature of this project has been really exciting to work on. And since we're about 1 year into a 3-year project here, it leaves a lot of great things to do in the future as well. So I'll get into some of the details of the project here, but overall, the M2M project is just a great model of the DOE's technology innovation and implementation goals. What this project has allowed us to do is use really, you know, it's a great deal of funding from the DOE, a great deal of funding from our partners, and it's allowed us to bring together a substantial number of partners with a substantial number of fuels, meaning we're focusing on 3 major alternative fuels instead of just one. And then this program covers a very broad scale, very large scale of just miles covered in the United States, and a very large scale of the audience, of the number of people we're working with. And so what I'll go over here is I'll do a brief overview of GTI, so you know where I'm coming from and how we've been involved in this, and then do a high-level summary of the M2M project, work through some of the details of our project plan and the partners we're working with, and then I'll pass it off to some of those partners and let them describe their specific roles and some of the activities that we've already taken on as part of this. So just as a brief overview for GTI, GTI is the applicant and the direct awardee to the Department of Energy on this project. We're a non-for-profit that's been around since about 1941, so over 75 years, doing all kinds of research for the federal government, also state governments, private sector, as well as utilities, natural gas utilities across the country. And we have over 300 active projects. These projects span the whole energy value chain, from exploration for new energy sources, renewable energy sources, the conversion of energy into different useful products, also the delivery, and then finally the utilization of energy, which leads to where I work is the transportation group. We do all sorts of clean vehicle and clean fueling station research here. And what we really like to focus on at GTI is the applied research. So not really the base science work where universities and some of the national labs get involved, and not the commercialization where a lot of our great project partners sell products and work directly with customers. But we like to work on kind of that middle stream where we're really applying technologies to new to new industries and new areas and where we can do early demonstration projects. GTI has offices all across the country. We're headquartered in Des Plaines, Illinois, and that's where my office is. But we also have people who do outreach out in Washington, D.C. for federal issues, of course, and then also a lot of people in California where there's substantial clean energy research going on. And some of these companies are spin-outs of technologies that have come from GTI, and some are acquisitions of companies that have worked in our space and that we just wanted to have closer relationships with. We have approximately 400 people across the country working for GTI. So now to get into the details of this project and why we're here today. The U.S. Department of Energy selected this project to receive approximately $5 million, with approximately $5 million in our partners' cost share. So that just right there, it shows you it's truly, it's a lot of funding from the Department of Energy, and then it's a real lot of commitment from our partners, from the people who are part of this project. And it speaks to the scale of this project and what we're trying to get done with it. The M2M corridor will focus on activities along I-94 from Billings, Montana to the west all the way through to Port Huron, Michigan at the Canadian border at the east. This project has been going since late June, early July of 2017. And one of the novel parts of the scale of this corridor project is that it's not just one fuel, it's 3 fuels. We're focusing on fuels that are currently commercial along this corridor and really trying to build a sustainable environment. And so we're focusing on electric vehicles, natural gas vehicles, and propane vehicles, and then the fueling stations that support that. And this is a very important part of the Clean Cities program, is really providing support for all the alternative fuels and letting the market and letting the industries and letting each regional stakeholder decide what works for them and try to maximize the amount of petroleum reduced and maximize the emissions benefits. And we're really trying to follow that along with all of our program goals. And so I've listed 3 goals on the slides here. It's really, just kind of a few of the several goals of the program. But at a highest level, we're working to develop a team and get together a motivated group of people that can help guide the creation of an alternative fuel corridor along I-94. This is the real key here is not just to build something and build a network during this project. It's really to try to create something that can be sustainable beyond the life of this project. And in order to go about that, we're deploying stations in key locations. We're deploying vehicles that can help keep those stations fully loaded and keep them sustainable and keep them making money so that they stay on the corridor for well beyond the life of this project. And then the other part is to be able to do the planning and outreach, education, and training that's really needed to support the alternative fuel markets along these corridors. And I've used the word sustainable a couple times already, and I sure will throughout the rest of the presentation, because it really is the key to all of this. Being able to have that, the support team, the structure that allows for this build out, but then also allows for the stakeholders all along that are needed to support these vehicles and to maintain and just to remove any barriers that are along the path of changing the paradigm for transportation fuels. At a very high level, what we're trying to do is split into 2 major components: deployment and planning. And my image here on the right is of existing fueling stations along I-94. And this is to show a couple things. Number one, to show that there are several fueling stations along the I-94 corridor already. This is a highlight of DC fast chargers in blue, propane stations in red, and CNG stations in green. Now, what this also highlights is where there's some gaps in the fueling as well. And part of that is to show that here, and I'll try to point some out here as well. Along the corridor, you can see several areas where we need to start filling in stations. In western or kind of central Wisconsin, as well as western Michigan. And then you can see from the western edge of Minnesota, and for this grant that, you know, Montana and North Dakota are very underserved as well. And so what this grant has allowed us to do, as well as what the planning has done, is number one, just identify some of these gaps, but now start focusing on finding barriers in those areas and attempting to deploy stations as well as vehicles in those areas. And so as part of that, this grant will fund to approximately 60 CNG trucks that can sustain the corridor, as well as 15 alternative fuel stations. And some of the later presentations will be from some of these station providers that are partners on this. And then also, as I've mentioned, there's a key component of this project is planning. And that's just working with our community-based partners that can really allow this grant to continue, or allow the alternative fuel corridor to continue well beyond. And community-based partnerships are something that's very important to the Department of Energy, and it's something that's very important to a project like this, to not just support the technology users, as DOE often does, but to allow all the other partners that are key to the implementation of alternative fuels to be involved and to, you know, understand what's going on, and as well as you know, support things moving forward. So to get into a little more detail in that, the high level, our project plan is to work with those community partners and really focus on getting people together that don't necessarily work together on a day-to-day basis. So that's starting with the Clean Cities coordinators, and I have a great list of our partners on the next slide. But then bringing them to make sure that they're working with their state DOTs on highway programs. And Jeremy Orr will give some more information on that in a few minutes here. But then also working with state energy offices, station providers, fleets, utilities, and then there's many other working groups on freight movement in each region. There's so many different people that are looking at transportation issues across this region that just aren't you know, in constant communication. And so this program is meant to bring that together. Then the next key to this is actually getting equipment on the ground, stations and vehicles. As we all know, they need to work hand in hand. And so we'll be putting DC fast chargers, natural gas fueling stations, and propane stations, as well as CNG long haul trucks that will be partially supported by the Department of Energy. Then, as I was showing you in the map earlier, really identifying these gaps is key to this, to make sure that you can have a constant flow of traffic and a constant transportation cycle along a corridor. And so a big part of this will be to concentrate on those gaps and work to close them. Another exciting part of the transportation world right now is smart mobility programs. And so what this will let us do is leverage a lot of current smart mobility programs that are happening. There's a lot of great stakeholders in all of these regions that are focusing on that and seeing how we can leverage that to a corridor. And then finally, providing the outreach, education, and training that is so critical, that there's so many barriers that are caused just by a lack of knowledge or a lack of experience with alternative fuels and how they apply. And in order to do that, we need a whole lot of partners, which is another really exciting part of this project, is just the scale of it all. So to start, the key planning team are the Clean Cities coalitions along the corridor. I've listed them here. There's Greater Lansing in Michigan, South Shore Clean Cities in Indiana, Chicago Area Clean Cities in Illinois, Wisconsin Clean Cities, Twin Cities Clean Cities in Minnesota, and North Dakota Clean Cities in North Dakota. We're also working with Yellowstone Clean Cities, who covers Montana as well. And then there's also the deployment team. So those are the infrastructure providers, Zev and Trillium, Landmark for propane, and then fleets. We're working with Quick Trip and CTS, in both Wisconsin-based organizations. And then the list of community-based stakeholders, there's so many. This is essentially a kind of a preliminary list of folks that we have and will be reaching out to. But this list could go on, and it's the real critical part to this is getting to all of the communities along the corridor to make sure that this stays sustainable. Then finally, what we're working on is the outreach plan. This is kind of the current emphasis for the M2M project. And I'm kind of describing a snapshot in time of this whole effort. We're approximately 1 year into a 3-year project, and there's sure much work to do. But what we're really going to focus on here is getting a lot of great information, a lot of great conversations with people, be able to highlight a lot of key lessons learned and best practices, leverage a lot of existing information that the U.S. DOE already has and the Clean Cities program has already generated, and be able to get that out to our regional stakeholders and hopefully help create a model that others can use across the country. And so we'll have a dedicated website where we can put all this information, and then we'll start working on a kind of a coordinated communication strategy that can help build awareness and visibility to promote alternative fuels along this region and others. And that's going forward. We've already had several events. We've already had a presence at auto shows and some wonderful conferences that have happened regionally. We've had several face-to-face meetings, and we've really worked with a lot of the stakeholders already, but there's very, very much work still to do. So with that, that's my end of the overview of the M2M program, some of the work that we've already done, and some of the places we're hoping to go over the coming years here. So what I'll do now is I'll pass it off to Jeremy Orr, and then he'll pass it off to others to help describe many of the other programs and many of the other specific topics that have been covered through this project as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ted, for very enlightening information about this great project that is happening here in the Midwest. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're working on here in Northern Indiana. Again, my name is Carl Lisek. Again, as we started off the broadcast or the webinar here, we talked about the leverage and the collaboration of the things that we've been working on. And again, throughout the program, you're going to hear is how we're working together. And so the point of this whole conversation today is really to give you the ability to reach out to any one of us to hear about some of the things that we're working on, maybe to get some best management practices, just to learn about some of those things. And with the Northern Indiana half of the M2M project along I-94, we probably have the shortest distance in regards to the length of the I-94 corridor project. And how we've done, we've been able to leverage this with a variety of partners, as some of the things that Ted had described, but also, we're working with our local metropolitan planning organizations, our local unions, our laborers, our local operators. And there's also a big kick right now to with a lot of our metropolitan planning organizations along this 94 corridor who are planning their 2040 or 2050 plans. And so some of the things that we're trying to work with them is to identify, again, some of these gaps where these alternative fuel stations potentially are needed, but then also to work on leveraging this with other potential grants that might be coming out. And again, I think the elephant in the room has been the upcoming VW mitigation. And I think a lot of communities, a lot of businesses, not only along the I-94 corridor, we see this as an opportunity for, potentially additional vehicle deployment and also potentially some electric vehicle equipment deployment. Again, I think, working with our local utilities, working with all these different partnerships. And I would say to you, anybody that has any questions, please reach out to any one of us on this corridor. As you can see here with our deployment plan, we've worked with just about everybody that you can think of. There's big talk now on a daily basis. You're hearing about smart mobility programs in and about the United States. And all this plays into effect with our I-94 corridor project. So, as Ted kind of described some of the project deployment plan. And so one of the things that we also want to talk about are some of the upcoming events that we are planning through the Lake Michigan Consortium. And the Lake Michigan Consortium is basically, it's 3 Clean Cities coalitions, which we will be expanding to include all of our partners along the I-94 corridor. But we have an event we call the Green Drives Conference and event that will be hosted in Northern Illinois University Conference Center in Naperville on the 17th of May. And it gives you an opportunity, one, not only to focus on potentially some of the partners that are included on our I-94 corridor, but there's also going to be an opportunity for you to do ride and drives and hear about just different things that are going on in regards to some of the new technologies that are being deployed in and around the I-94 corridor. So you can find out more information about this project by contacting one of the 3 of us, Samantha Bingham, who's not on the line today, but is the Chicago Area Clean Cities Coordinator, and my wife, Lori Lisek, who is the Wisconsin Clean Cities Coordinator. So just a whole host of different things that we're going to be working on. And, we just feel like there's just an opportunity for us. Again, in Northern Indiana, our I-94 corridor is actually located in a non-attainment area with air quality. And so one of the things, working with all these different partners, we've actually been working on a variety of safety initiatives with, Coast Guard, with FBI. There's a consortium of things that we're working on and training our first responders. And all this information, if there's interest, throughout the United States, the whole idea behind our program is to be able to share our best management practices on this. But a whole host of events that we're planning for 2018 and 2019, and we're just excited. And we want to share all this information with everybody. And I think if you reach out to any of the different Clean Cities coordinators, the different partners, our private sector partners that are involved in this, this is not information that is to be kept close to the vest. This is information that we want to share and be very transparent on how we can reduce our dependence on imported oil, not only along I-94, but across the country. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeremy Orr. He's the environmental planner and coordinator for the Greater Lansing Area Clean Cities, and he'll give you an update on some of the things that he's working on in Michigan. Jeremy, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Carl. Hi, everybody. As Carl mentioned, I'm Jeremy Orr. I'm an environmental planner here at Tri-County Regional Planning Commission at MPO, Lansing, Michigan, where I also serve as the coordinator for Greater Lansing Area Clean Cities. And I was asked the other day to speak briefly about the process with last round's alternative fuels corridor designation process. And Catherine, I'm having issues going to the next slide. There we go. Still don't have control. Hey, Carl or Catherine.
I got you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So basically, as most of you are aware of, the FAST Act Alternative Fuels Corridor request for nominations. This past fall we had round 2. It's basically part of Federal Highway's goal of creating a national network of alternative fueling and charging infrastructure. I-94 was previously designated as an alternative fuels corridor, as part of the Michigan to Montana program, as Ted had mentioned. And during round 1, fiscal year 2016 of the designations, Michigan's portion of I-94 was designated an EV signage-ready corridor, meaning that it fit the criteria set forth by Federal Highway for EV infrastructure at that time, which then included both level 2 and DC fast charging infrastructure. But the most recent route, as most of you know, included only DC fast. And of course, other portions of 94 from Michigan to Montana also earned designations as well. But this last round, looking at it, I wanted to add other designations for CNG and propane. So I responded to the nomination and wrote a proposal for both signage ready for both fuels from Port Huron, Michigan to Benton Harbor. And next slide, Catherine. And so basically what you see here, this is a map of the corridor, just of Michigan's portion. The green arrows there are CNG, the orange arrows are propane, and basically this is just, this is based off data at the AFDC, Alternative Fuels Data Center Station Locator, which is a requirement to use for the designation process anyways to write the proposals. Basically use that to map out the locations, export that data to Google Maps, and that's what you see here. Actually, this one in particular is the one that Ted just showed on his slides. He actually provided to the coordinators as part of the M2M program these maps. And this is a little snippet close-up of what's going on here in Michigan. As you can see, as I mentioned, this designation I was focused just on CNG propane since the last round. We're already designated as EV. So you see here just the CNG and propane stations, and basically as you see, the Western Michigan's pretty barren. And so writing this, what I did is I looked at Port Huron to Benton Harbor for signage ready. And you see there the bullet points, that's Federal Highways criteria this last round for a signage ready corridor. And you need a minimum of 2 or 3 stations. The corridor interstate has to be at least 100 miles in length. For propane, to be signage ready, it has to be public, has to be primary, no more than 150 miles between stations. And for CNG, likewise, no greater than 150 miles between stations. Has to be public, fast fill, has to be 3,600 PSI. And, calculating the distances, use Google Maps, things like that. And I was in frequent contact with Federal Highway /DOT. Diane Trichetta and Mike Scarpino were more than helpful, answering any and all questions I had about the distances, about, where to get the information. Pretty much anything to do with the narrative portion of the proposal, they were more than helpful in providing guidance and answering my questions. And then also from the GIS side of things, Sapine Yoder is more than helpful in answering those questions. And she worked closely with my GIS specialist here internally at Tri-County. They were able to kind of work back and forth, and he was able to kind of provide a lot of the answers that she had or questions she had and go back and forth. And it was incredibly helpful to have that GIS support internally that could develop those materials for me, since that's not necessarily my purview. And of course, clean cities cannot actually submit these proposals. So Michigan Department of Transportation is a close partner of mine on the M2M project. And so I reached out to them and asked if they can actually submit the proposal on GLAC's behalf, and they're more than helpful or more than happy to. And it should also be noted that it wasn't just me. I wasn't the only coordinator working on this proposal. Even though Michigan was the only state along 94 submitting a proposal this round, it truly was still a collaborative effort between myself and the other coordinators. Providing support, whether it's editing the proposal that I'd written, helping write sections of the proposal, offering letters of support, or just general guidance as to how to approach it overall. And that was incredibly helpful as well. Catherine, next slide, please. Thank you. And so what was the outcome? So basically, Federal Highway released designation results recently. Yeah, that's it right there. And, Michigan's I-94 was designated as CNG ready from, hey, Catherine, can I have control of the, there we go. I want to make sure I can scroll my cursor around, everyone can see what I'm doing here. Looks like it. Okay. So basically, Michigan's I-94, it was designated CNG ready from Port Huron, up here, the green arrows, down to Ann Arbor. And CNG pending from Ann Arbor all across the barren wasteland here down to the Michigan-Indiana border. And for propane, we were designated propane ready from Clinton Township, Michigan, in this area, down to Jackson, Michigan. And of course, we were propane ready designated from Port Huron, through this little stretch here, and then from Jackson, Michigan, down to the barren wasteland, down to the Michigan-Indiana border. So basically, what does all that mean? I mean, so as you saw from the previous slide, obviously for the portions that are CNG ready or propane ready, we met, the criteria. We already had sufficient infrastructure in place as per Federal Highways criteria. And for the pending, it just means we didn't have that criteria. We didn't meet the criteria. We didn't have sufficient infrastructure based on distances, whatever it was. And so basically, we just now need to develop a plan to deploy CNG and propane infrastructure to fill those gaps. We've already been in discussions with Trillium CNG, who you will be hearing from shortly, to fill the gap west of Ann Arbor. Down here in Kalamazoo, we're kind of working with building partnerships with fleets down there as we speak, kind of gauging interest and hopefully have something deployed down there. And also, I mean, like Carl mentioned earlier, the cross-border collaboration is something he and I talked about during last round. In the future, how can we collaborate with, because this isn't just Michigan's I-94 or Indiana or Illinois. It truly is a group effort. So how can we collaborate in the future across border? How can we do the cross-border collaboration to kind of connect the dots along the corridor from state to state? And next slide, please, Catherine. And so what's next? Well, first off, it's a signage deployment, kind of focusing on that. As I mentioned earlier, Michigan Department of Transportation, they've been a partner of ours in the M2M program. They've already identified 6 key locations along 94 for alternative fuels corridor signage. And we're working closely with them, myself, GTI, Ted Barnes, DOT, Federal Highways, and we're going to, we'll be having discussions with them moving forward, kind of describing signage and why it's good for branding for the corridor, how it helps tell the story for consumers, whatnot. And I'm hopeful that we can start signage deployment this summer. And aside from the 6 key locations, anywhere along the corridor where we feel we need like EV signage, for instance, for DC fast chargers or whatever it may be, I'll be working with local jurisdictions on that. That's out of the purview of MDOT. But first, I want to focus on those 6 key locations, get the alternative fuels corridor signage rolled out before that. And also filling, like I mentioned earlier, filling CNG and propane gaps, working with companies like Trillium CNG on places like Kalamazoo and working with Carl on the cross-border collaboration, kind of connect those dots along the states. And also looking at other corridors, how can 94 serve as a model for other corridors, not just in Michigan, but across the upper Midwest in general and other corridors as well. A lot of the partners in Michigan, they're not interested just in I-94. They're also, we've been talking about I-96 and I-69 and US 127, and look what's happening in Traverse City, Michigan with tourism. And there's a huge need now up there for EV infrastructure, and of course EV infrastructure across or up the shoreline from Detroit. And so discussions have begun there as well. And there's a lot of focus right now on what's going on in I-94 to kind of use that as a stepping point. And aside from the designation process in general, just general M2M things we've been working on, kind of talking to Michigan State University. There's a lot of interest there among their engineering and economics department in collaborating on a study of sorts. And the study would collect data at the station level. Right now, focus more on EV, sort of like time of day, frequency of use, things of that nature, and then do like a deeper market analysis or deeper dive into consumer behavior, analyzing the data. What does that tell us? How can that help inform, build out infrastructure in the future, not just in I-94, across the upper Midwest, but other corridors across the states as well. Been working pretty closely with Zev Energy, who you'll be hearing from shortly. We had the opportunity to scout some preliminary DC fast charger locations along 94 a couple of weeks ago, and we've since been in discussions with some utilities, and those discussions have been hopeful, and we're looking forward to working closely with them as we move forward with that. And other than that, as far as M2M project overall, still continue to build those partnerships along the corridor with trucking associations, and recently had discussions with the motor carrier advisory group and whatnot, and just moving along. And that pretty much sums it up.
Well, thank you, Jeremy.
Yep.
And I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Rowe. He's the Senior Manager of Business Development for Trillium CNG. Mark?
Thanks, Carl. Thank you all for a few minutes of your time this afternoon, or this morning, I should say. A few things I'm going to talk about with you. I'll introduce you to who Trillium CNG is and where we fit into this project. We'll focus on some of the areas along this corridor where we've got some station capital earmarked for projects, as well as other areas along the corridor where we've identified pockets of interest just through outreach and collaborative communication across some of these groups of folks working together for this project. I'll touch on our overall the plans for the project, and including outreach and project deployment, et cetera, and then have a little bit of have a couple slides on renewable natural gas, which I think is certainly a high level of interest across the folks looking at CNG or already operating in the CNG space. So, who is Trillium? We traced our roots to the early 90s, and it started out in the large-scale compression business, designing, constructing, and deploying, CNG infrastructure that was capable of fueling, transit buses from coast to coast. So we've, and our engineering, background is really, they really cut their teeth in that large-scale compression business, and making sure that our customers, fueled their captive fleet audience in their defined time window, and were able to meet rollout the next morning, most importantly. So we've really got decades of engineering, design, and construction experience in the CNG infrastructure business, and in parallel with that, and maybe even more importantly with that, we've got decades of operating and maintaining this equipment as well. In late 2015, we were identified as by the Loves family of companies as a company that they were willing to invest in, and they acquired our company, and we officially became a member of the Loves family of companies in March of 2016. So we've been under that corporate umbrella for the last 2 years now. It's really been a great fit for our organization into a broader fuel company. Specific to CNG, we operate a nationwide network of CNG stations. Those vary in size and scope, but graphically, we cover a lot of ground between our retail network, represented in the green and yellow, and operated stations where we are, operating sites for others in the blue. So, being a part of a larger fuel distribution company, the Loves family of companies is in the fuel business. They are, I believe, the second largest retailer and wholesaler in the country, and we really manage the CNG business for the Loves family of companies. So, Trillium is a turnkey CNG solutions provider. I touched on it earlier. We have full functionality of the design, build, operation, and maintenance businesses, and are able to design a turnkey solution set for our customers. And that looks a little bit differently depending on what market segment or customer base that we work with. In the Class 8 over the road segment, a lot of times those customers are interested in fueling in a retail environment. Their drivers are used to pulling up to a Loves, for example, and purchasing their fuel at a retail convenience store feel. So we've got a multitude of locations that feel like that. Conversely, we work with a lot of refuse companies that are maybe an opposite approach, where they want to fuel their vehicles behind the gates, and a lot of times are able to time fill those pieces of equipment over a certain several hour period. So and again, back to our engineering roots in the transit space, they're very similar in the sense that they fuel their vehicles over a defined time window. And then more recently, in conjunction with the Volkswagen mitigation settlement that Carl Lisek mentioned, we've received a renewed interest in the municipal government space. There are those municipal fleets that do operate refuse units, and that's certainly a great fit for CNG. But there are others that don't, and I've had a lot of conversations here, in the last 18 months about how does CNG look for a municipal government fleet, with or without refuse. And I think we've got a solution set that works for that. So, CNG as a fuel, I wanted to highlight a couple key items that complete the value proposition. Natural gas provides a long-term, low-cost solution for fleets from the fuel standpoint. The cost curve for natural gas forward is very flat. We do see, volatility, with some of the liquid and petroleum fuels, that's just more volatile than natural gas. And why is that? We've got, a large domestic supply of natural gas here in the United States. Some forecasters would say we've got about 100-year of usable supply that's identified today, and up to a 300-year supply of natural gas that's recoverable. Just from folks that are more into that than I am. CNG is when you couple it with some available engines that are hitting the market today, with the renewable gas piece that I spoke of earlier, it really it is the cleanest commercially available fuel for medium and heavy duty vehicles. And there's more slides on that, to follow. And then, I didn't speak on it earlier, but I cover a majority of the Midwest into the Northeast. So I cover a lot of ground, and all the conversations I have, fleets and those looking to operate, natural gas vehicles are very in tune with the state and federal incentives, and the Volkswagen settlement, certainly fits into that bucket as well. So the chicken and egg scenario is really the conversation that we as an industry come back to very often. And I like to say that we're in the business of solving that that question with our customers. It's not for, it's certainly with. And customized fueling solutions for fleets of all class sizes is what we do. So and certainly what we've done in the past. So we've got multiple data points of working with fleets of all shapes and sizes, and how CNG might work for them. So I like to tell folks that it all starts with a conversation. And certainly I'm available as a participant in this corridor, as someone that's active in this marketplace, that lives in this market and is passionate about alternative fuels. I am please consider me a resource for those conversations, especially when it's specific to CNG and how our experience may parlay into opportunities or even consideration for your fleets or your partner's fleets' interest in this space. So specific to this corridor, we want to do a couple things. We want to expand and add some other dots on our Trillium CNG station map. We've got some fueling along this corridor already. We know there are many great CNG fleets that already have vehicles on this corridor. There's some others that are participating as those that are adding trucks to this MDM corridor. So we know that the captive audience is out there. We continue to see interest in over-the-road markets and local market segments too. How do we leverage these existing networks and grow that truck count, if you will. Secondarily, we want to find the next wave of interested folks. I think that if you did a straw poll of the Class 8 and the refuse customers that are already in this space, you would see that they're using these grant fundings and their playbook to further their investment in natural gas today, and potentially like some of these fleets that are on my slides, potentially further themselves from the competition when we see $4 diesel again, and the shipping costs skyrocket for a lot of these diesel-only users today. Areas of interest, we've got two sites that we have earmarked investment along this corridor. It's Gary, Indiana, and Menominee, Wisconsin. Through that outreach I mentioned earlier, we've had several fruitful conversations in additional markets, those being Chicago, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Newport, Minnesota, outside of the Twin Cities, as well as a couple others. Again, I touched on it earlier. I'm a resource if you're interested in having me to you and your fleet conversations, or if you're a fleet operator, certainly I've got experience with fleets of all shapes and sizes and how CNG might look for you. It certainly doesn't look the same way for everybody. So I would emphasize that for those going into a new alternative fuel consideration, it doesn't look maybe like your neighbor's does or like your competitor's does. So please leverage me as you need be. I'm a visual person, so I wanted to just show some representations of our installations here in the Midwest. This is our site in Rockford. That's our anchor partner that operates refuse fleet across the street. This is our Omaha, Nebraska station. We've got several great customers out there, and this is, I think, the grand opening. So they all came that day, and it was a great event. And this is one of our sites in Ohio that we built for American Honda. A great looking station with a lot of Class 8 and local shuttle operators that operate in that market. Renewable gas, I know we're getting close on time, but I thought its relevance to the conversation. Renewable gas is very interesting. It really, what is it, first of all? It is methane that's produced naturally through a couple different formats, agricultural waste, dairy farms, wastewater facilities, all metropolitan areas do something with their wastewater, landfills, and food waste. This methane, if it is not treated or not mandated to be captured, it escapes into the atmosphere and is very harmful to the environment. So what industry has done is found a way to capture, treat, clean, and reintroduce that same methane back into the pipeline or into a vehicle tank for on-site captive consumption. There's a lot of great stories out there. I won't get into those, but I certainly encourage you to do some research on some projects that have been funded nationally in that space. But for fleet operators, RNG is no different than CNG. Renewable gas is generated. This is a landfill example, and waste is transported to a digester facility at a landfill that's purified, repurposed for pipeline quality, and then it's either consumed by said refuse truck or captive audience, or it's introduced in the pipeline to be transported anywhere and consumed by any end user. So Trillium's interest in this is multiple fronts, but we certainly have offtake agreements in place and distribution points throughout the country to dispense RNG to those fleet users. This is graphically showing a carbon intensity of fuels across the spectrum, and I point out the ones in green where, again, coupled with the right engine technology and a renewable gas supply, you're able to have a very low carbon intensity score or even a net negative. A lot of information on that out there, and would encourage you to lean on your industry contacts to get more information on that. In summary, CNG is a low, stable, domestically available fuel supply that's the cleanest commercially available in the heavy duty and the medium duty space. There's a growing network of infrastructure that's available today, and we certainly want to add to that with this project and others. And in closing, encourage you to reach out to me as again, a resource for you and your alternative fuel exploration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark, for that update on the different areas of compressed natural gas and renewable natural gas in and around the I-94 corridor project. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Matthew Blackler. He's the CEO of Zev Energy. Matthew?
Hi there. Thanks, Carl. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Blackler. I'm the CEO of Zev Energy. So today I'm going to be talking about the electric portion of this corridor. So what I wanted to do was give you a quick introduction to who Zev is, why we're excited about the project, give you a really quick overview and introduction to different levels of EV charging. Look at the corridor, look see what the progress is to date, talk about partnerships and challenges, and then talk about the next steps. All right, so who is Zev Energy? So we've been around for about 4 years. We are an electric vehicle infrastructure solutions company. So we roll out fast chargers, and we own and operate a fast charging network. That's one of the first things that we do. The second thing that we do is we have a level 2 kind of residential and workplace smart charging products, so that utilities can control their peak load demand from residential and workplace electric vehicle charging. So we have two different lines of business. So the line of business that we're going to be talking about today is the fast charging line of business. So that's a quick introduction about Zev Energy. So, why are we excited about this project? One of the big things that we're excited about is the education and outreach part. So previously, when we've executed projects for example, for automobile manufacturers, we've gone out there, we've done what we do best, and that's project develop infrastructure projects. And so we get them in the ground, we get them working, and we operate them. However, there's not been a huge amount of education around that piece of equipment that suddenly appeared at this local retailer. And so that's where this program is very different. So, part of it is about getting infrastructure in the ground, but a huge part of it is about educating the community around what electric vehicles are, what this electric vehicle charger is, why it's better than what used to exist. It's that educational part is so important, especially with electric vehicles, because it's such a different paradigm to the way that people have traditionally fueled their vehicles. The idea that you can fuel in a totally decentralized manner is totally new. People haven't been able to do this before. You've always had to go to a fueling station before. So that's the first thing that we're really excited about, and that's the education and outreach piece of this program. Something that projects often overlook. Second thing we're really excited about is the partnerships that we're gaining through running this program through 3 different states. So we're speaking to an awful lot of site hosts. We're talking to a lot of local actors. So, people from different clean cities coalitions or state offices, not to mention utilities, because of course utilities are a huge part of this as well. Without utility backing and their funding towards these projects, we couldn't make this work. Utilities over the past 6 to 9 months have been more interested than ever in finding out more about fast charging, providing fast charging to people in their territory to make sure that they can see the load growth back at home where people are charging overnight. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the major reasons is increase in range on reasonably priced electric vehicles. That really has been key, I think, to utilities accepting that these electric vehicles are here to stay. They keep on getting cheaper. They will continue to keep on getting cheaper, and more people will continue to buy these. So they can't put off the decision to hold off making infrastructure investments any longer. And so that's worked really well for this particular program, because as you all know, a large part of this funding comes from non-governmental sources. So that's worked really well for us. Okay. So that's why we're excited about the project. The educational piece, and also the partnerships that we're able to gain and across multiple different states. So that's really exciting. So what I'm going to do now is give you a really quick overview of electric vehicle charging. I'm sure some of you will know this backwards, but I'm sure there's probably a number of you out there who probably aren't too au fait with what electric vehicle charging looks like. So All right, so could somebody advance the slide, please? It's not working for me. Fantastic. All right, so what we're seeing in the photo here is a Nissan Leaf. So a Nissan Leaf, after incentives, is $22,000 these days, and the newest Nissan Leaf does 150 miles of range on a single charge. There is a higher spec Leaf being released in the fall, and that's going to be able to do 240 miles on a single charge. It simply has a bigger battery. We expect that price to be about $33,000. And what you can see here is not too dissimilar to what we're going to be rolling out. So that is a DC fast charger. So if somebody talks about a DC fast charger, this is what it looks like. It's basically the size of a fridge, and it has a couple of connectors on it that you can use for different types of vehicles. All right, could we go to the next slide, please? Fantastic. All right, so how do you charge at home? How is this decentralized? Well, every car comes with a charger, and that's the charger on the left-hand side. So it's often termed as a cord set. And that plugs into a normal outlet, so a 110 outlet. Now, and that comes free with the car. So that's great for people who only travel about 35 miles a day, because you can charge it overnight. The challenge is that if you have a bigger battery on the vehicle, or if you do a lot of miles each day, that's not going to be fast enough for you. So on the right-hand side, we can see what's known as a level 2 charger. So the main difference between a level 1 charger and a level 2 charger is the voltage that you run at. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have 120 volts. So level 1 means 120 volts. Level 2 is 240 volts. So, not only do you have a higher voltage, but you have the capacity to ramp up the current as well. And all it means is that you can throw more electrons down the pipe into the battery. And I've given some illustrations there of the difference of charging times on level 1 or level 2. All right, next slide, please. All right, here's some examples of how you would charge at home or out in public. Here you can see so one of our charging partners is Clipper Creek. So we've just shown some examples of some installations, and people get quite proud of their installations. They take photos of them and they actually send them into Clipper Creek. It's kind of cool. All right, next slide, please. So that's level 1, level 2. That's how you charge at home or at the workplace. However, there are going to be that 1 to 5% of the trips that you make where you have to charge en route. That's where fast chargers come into place. And fast chargers are one of the key tenets of the corridor of the electric vehicle corridor rollout. We have to have a way of being able to throw a lot of energy into that battery really quickly. So we want to make sure that electric vehicle drivers start to have an experience which comes closer in parity to that of a normal gas station fill up. A normal gas station fill up on average is about 7 minutes. So that's where we're trying to get to. All right, so the fast charger that you can see here, that is a 50 kilowatt fast charger. It requires a 3-phase power feed at 480 volts. So you do have to work with your utility to make sure that you can get an industrial level of power out to that particular charger. Now, as I mentioned, this is a 50 kilowatt charger. So 50 kilowatts provides you 200 miles of range in 1 hour. In order to get that same range from a level 2 home charger, that would take you about 8 hours. So the experience is an awful lot faster. Now, a 50 kilowatt charger those have been around for about 4 years, something like that. The next step in charging is going to be 150 kilowatts chargers. Then after that, 350 kilowatt chargers. Those chargers are starting to exist on the market, and they're going to start to be rolled out at the back end of this year. We expect that next year, some of the chargers that we roll out will be these high-level chargers. We don't necessarily expect that to happen this year. All right, so if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so that was a quick EV charging overview. We have level 1, 110 volts, level 2, 240 volts. Most of the time, that's how you charge at home or at the workplace. We then covered DC fast chargers. DC fast chargers, also known as level 3 chargers. So now we're going to look at the corridor. So what's happening this year? So this map illustrates the Zev Energy network that we currently have built out. In the blue, we can see the charges that we have in a subscription that we run. So it's $30 a month, and you can charge as much as you want at our fast chargers. And then you can see in the kind of purple, those some other chargers that we own and operate down around Madison, Milwaukee. Those aren't included in that subscription, but they still provide the same level of power. So these are 50 kilowatt chargers. And then the units that you can see in grey, those are chargers that we're aiming to have rolled out this year. And the majority of those are part of the M2M corridor. Now, what's the progress been to date? So progress to date is that we have site control for projects in Wisconsin. So that's in Toma. So we're hoping to get that installed in the next 8 to 10 weeks. We're in active negotiations at the top end of Minnesota. So those first three on the far west side of the corridor, we're in active negotiation. And we're currently working in Michigan with our friend Jeremy, and we're currently in active discussions with utilities. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key things, one of the key cost drivers, unsurprisingly, for these fast chargers is our electricity bill. There's a very specific part of the electricity bill, and that is demand charges. So the likes of Trillium will have experienced this because they will also pay demand charges for when their motors kick on. So if you weren't aware of this, one of the key parts of a commercial and industrial electricity bill is the demand. So how quickly are you pulling energy off the grid? So what's the highest power that the distribution utility saw you pull in that month? So what can happen is if we don't have a rate schedule that reflects the fact that a fast charger is a very peaky piece of equipment. It doesn't draw a lot of kilowatt hours, but it draws a lot of kilowatts. So it introduces high spikes or peaks on the distribution grid. If we don't have a rate schedule that recognizes this is a very different type of load, then we're not able to roll out a fast charger in that particular territory. And this can be quite challenging, specifically with investor-owned utilities, because the ability for investor-owned utilities to negotiate on a rate schedule and then implement it and put it in place is very difficult. And the reason why it's very difficult is because they have to put a rate case to the Public Utilities Commission or the Public Services Commission, depending upon your state. That can take 24 months often, and it's very rare that an investor-owned utility would try and do it just for one fringe case. So when we look at where we roll out to, so as you look at this map, we really have to take very special care over specifically which partners we're working with out in the field, because we need to make sure from the outset we have the ability to manage our demand. So that's definitely one of our big challenges. So making sure that we can manage demand charges. If they're not managed, then as an example, on a 350 kilowatt fast charger, we could lose over $60,000 a year. And that is solely because of a rate schedule that has demand charges which are out of whack with the way that fast chargers work. So it's a challenge, but we can often work through it. Okay, so I've talked about the progress along the corridor. I've talked about one of the main drivers behind where we actually put these charges, one of our biggest cost drivers. So what I'd like to talk about next is, where's the market going? And I kind of alluded to it earlier, and that is these faster level of chargers, so 160 kilowatts, so 150 kilowatt chargers and 350 kilowatt chargers. This rate of charging allows us to get almost in parity with a normal fueling experience. So if we look at a 350 kilowatt charger, in 10 minutes, we're able, a 10-minute charging session will give you 210 miles. It's enough for you to drive, say, for 3 hours, stop again, stretch your legs, rest. And whilst you're stretching your legs and resting, your car charges up again. So getting to 350 kilowatts at some point in the near future is going to be key to mass market adoption for vehicles. It's going to take a lot of work from people like ourselves, working with utilities and public service commissions to make sure that the cost structure, as reflected in the rate schedule, is such that we can actually operate these chargers, still make margin, and keep these things reliable, maintained, and open for use by the driving public. All right, I think I'm done. So thanks for your time, everyone. And if we could go to the next slide, please. If you do have any questions around anything that I talked about today, please do feel free to reach out. We normally have the answers, or we can get answers fairly quickly for you around these DC fast chargers, where they're going, what the costs look like, what the challenges are around demand charges. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Great presentation. Thank you to all of our speakers today. Obviously, there's a lot of information that we covered, and that's why we're recording this. Please feel free to reach out to any of us on this, and we'll be doing some additional follow-up on these webinars upcoming months to give you an update on our I-94 corridor project. So with that, we'd just like to say thank you again for your time today, and we look forward to working with you all. Have a great day, everybody.